their family. They have lost their home. Often they've lost their school and all those supports, their friends, their neighborhood, anybody that they had in that connection. And they're often bounced from home to home. So they wake up one morning and they know nothing about the rules of this house. What will they be facing for breakfast? What school will they be going to? And they have all this trauma and no one to talk to. They know none of these people. Their friends or people at school that they may have had as supports aren't there anymore. Aunt Sally down the way or the neighbor who was nice to them, they're not there anymore. So they are truly isolated. And they have no voice and no say in which house they will end up in, what the rules of that house will be, nothing whatsoever. So just to kind of keep that in mind in terms of that situation for them and that trauma. So it doesn't become that odd that this leads to a higher prevalence in children in youth prisons. Nearly half of the children who are there are or have been investigated by CPS before they were investigated by any law thing. They represent about 60% of the cases in the child sex trade. And only half of the children who have been in foster care graduate from high school. And that is a worse percentage than children who are homeless. So if you're homeless, you have, with your family, you have a better chance of graduating from high school than if you get into our state care. So you might question how good we've been at our responsibility of taking care of these children. So with that in mind, that setting, let me kind of go through what were the bills last year, what we're going to be looking at this year. One of the ones that it followed and really thought was going to pass and didn't was 1405, and that was preserving public benefits payments. Right now, if a child has public benefit payments, say their other parent died and they're getting SSI or veterans benefits or something like that, they get taken into state care. Those benefits are absorbed by the state with the idea that that's for their care. The bill was set to try and put that money into a fund that would then be there for those children's use when they aged out of foster care. Also, part of that bill was that they would be provided financial education, which made me think, oh, well, I guess children don't get financial education. It's just a general thing. It has to be added. So that strategy for developing financial literacy was built in. It passed through the different committees, no problem. And I was shocked when it got to the House floor. The testimony against it and the arguments against it were to me shocking and vicious. There were heated rants, if you will, against giving those children that money because they wouldn't know how to spend it. They're all drug addicts or they have mental health problems, and that money would just be wasted. And it didn't pass. So the legislature did appropriate a bit of money to say, well, go back and study this issue and come back later. So the bill itself will not be in front of the legislature this year. There is a study, and Representative Callum, who introduced it, is hoping that through the study, they'll be able to bring the bill back in the 2025 session and keep at that. The other one that will be going forward, the Mockingbird Society actually works with youth and puts their voices and works their voices into the legislature that they promote. And they have been promoting for several years now and will continue for extended foster care services. And right now, under certain circumstances, foster care services can be extended from 18 to 21 if a child's in some kind of training or school or a work that doesn't provide enough for housing and that sort of thing. The bill is to extend that from 21 to 25 with the idea that just because they're 21 doesn't necessarily mean that they're still not needing some kind of support to really get a solid foundation going forward. And then the other one that created quite a bunch of havoc and doesn't deal with foster care children or state care children directly was the duty of clergy to report child abuse or neglect. The bill came to both the House and the Senate, and the House added an amendment that took away the clergy penitent exception. So the bill originally said clergy has to report, except if they hear about this in confession, and then that doesn't count. The House took that away, and the Senate did not. Both versions passed their respective houses, and when the House looked at the Senate bill, they added the amendment, and the Senate refused to. So it didn't go anywhere. It created over an hour of different debate on the floor around this particular amendment. So I expect that that will be back this year and that it will have the same kind of controversy. So kind of keep that. If you want one that's going to cause sparks and some excitement, that's one to follow. And finally, I don't know what the bill is going to look like at this point. In 2020, the legislature passed the Safe Harbor Law, and that law was to create centers for commercially sexually exploited children to give them trauma-based treatment. They gave $500,000 to the creation of 2 treatment centers, one on the east side and one on the west side. The stipulation was there could be no new construction. It had to be a building that was already existed, and it had to be both licensed as a behavioral health center and for residential care. No center has existed on the west side because there was no organization that felt like they met the criteria. The east side had a center in Spokane, Daybreak, and some of you may know, that recently closed because the staff was abusing the children. So at this point, there are no centers. Nothing has been done toward creating this bill. And the Tina Orwell, who had supported or who brought the bill up, has met with some different providers and is trying to decide how to move this forward. One of the things that they are looking at is also adding that presently, if a child is in foster care and goes missing, there is no mandate that that child has to then be screened for any kind of sexual exploitation. And they're trying to think about how they might add this mandate into the law as well. So that might help at least expose some of these children on and get them into treatment. They're also thinking that there should be some short-term solutions, that maybe that there could be daycare drop-ins for these kids, or respite centers for the kids in crisis. With the fentanyl crisis, that has overlapped with the kids that are being sexually exploited, and many of them are also dying because there's no other place for them to be. And then one other little just piece of information that will slide into Catherine's presentation and gets into education is that a recent study shows that most of the youth in the juvenile justice system in children's prisons do not receive even basic education, and thus are not prepared at all for life after aging out of foster care. So at that, I'll turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you,
You know
Janet.
what? Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say that we had a few minutes of Janet's time left. Does anyone have a burning question for Janet? We'll have a period of questions at the end, but anything that was sparked for you?
Oops. Yeah.
Susan?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, I know that the foster care system has lots of problems. There are some well-meaning foster parents, of course. Many times kids just are not well treated when they're under state care. They've been taken from their homes because of abuse or neglect, and so certainly they have needs. I'm just wondering if Janet has any ideas about how we could better house these children. What kind of living situation would keep them safer?
That's a great question, and I don't know that I have an answer, although there have been some things that have nibbled around the edges. Last year, they did pass a bill that when a child is either in possibly being taken out of their home because of lack of housing, or the parent has gone through all of the different steps to get the child back in the home but still lacks housing, that there are now resources to help them find housing so that they keep the child in that home. However, there's no money to actually pay for the housing. It's just resources to help you find housing. So in some of those cases like that, where housing or some of the abuse and neglect that happens is due simply to poverty. And so I guess my answer would be, if we would give those families the money to alleviate some of those causes, that would be the most effective way to keep children in their own homes and not in state care. But that's not something we have wanted to do.
We have we've
make
time
a
for
comment?
one more question. Karen?
I don't have a question. I have a comment.
Oh,
Speaking as a social worker, family counselor, working with the family in their own home or wherever they are, to keep them with their parents is often much healthier than what happens in foster care. So I really support your concept of trying to meet the issue on the other end instead of removing kids from their family and then abandoning them, essentially.
thank you, Karen. Joanna and Ann, can you hold on to your question till the end? We promised to make time for questions at the end after we hear from Catherine and me. Catherine, you want to? Thank you, Janet. I'm glad that your presentation sparked thought and interest, and even if you don't get called out, it's a really important issue.
Well, I clearly think so.
Well, I expect to be working closely with Janet and possibly criminal justice issue chair too, on this foster children who are incarcerated. And I want to remind all of you that our state constitution has only one paramount duty, and that is to make ample provision for the education of all children residing in its boundaries. Well, that includes foster kids in the prison system. And when only 14% of those are getting a high school diploma, it says to me they're not getting the education support that they need. And so we expect some bills to be introduced trying to address this problem this session. We don't know a number of them yet, but it's a really important issue. These kids deserve education support and behavioral health support and all the other supports that are supposed to be given to our kids. The other issue we were hoping to address again this session, but it being short, we probably won't get to it. And that is to look at the prototypical school model funding. And that's basically what the definition of basic education and how many people should be in each school. It was passed in 2011 in response to the lawsuit filed against the state. But it basically hasn't been fully updated since 2011. Well, we have many other issues now that need to be addressed. We still need more support personnel in the schools, counselors, nurses, social workers, psychiatrists, to help these kids. If we don't help them at a young age, it's only going to get worse at an older age. And that's just not right. So I don't, according to Speaker Jenkins, this isn't going to be addressed this session. But we'll see. The other is to fully fund special education. Many local school districts, probably all of them, are having to have money in their levies to pay for special ed support that they're not getting from the state. It's not local taxpayers' responsibility, it's the state and frankly the federal government, although I have less well, I just have less about the federal government. But one of the things they did do last year, they did add some money to special ed, and they increased the percentage of your student body that you can have in special ed from 13.5% to 15%. Well, that's a start, but there are still schools that have over 15% of their student body in special ed. And so then they have to go begging to the state for special funding for these kids, which is a difficult process in many cases. So we still need to work on fully funding special ed. It's one of those important things. A couple of issues from last year, some bills that didn't get passed that we'll be looking for again this session. One was, there was a wonderful bill in the House that would provide more state money to teachers and other support personnel to be able to do the evaluation of students during the summers to see if they needed special ed support. As it is now, and this affects a lot of military kids, I know, but if you move into the state after the end of the school year, you're not going to get evaluated until September or later of the following school year. And the evaluation process takes time. And so you're missing out on those special ed supports while the evaluation is going on. And so you're already starting behind in November, December with your support services. So that was a great bill, and it passed the House, but it didn't get out of Ways and Means in the Senate. So this year it can start in Ways and Means and pick up there and hopefully pass the Senate. The other one is was a Senate. Oh, that bill number 2 is House Bill 1109. Then another bill, which was a Senate Bill 5102, concerned school library information and technology programs. And this is an education equity issue because not all schools in our state have librarian services. Librarians are now classified as teacher librarians. And if we want information about technology, literacy, media, that sort of thing, it starts with the librarian who teaches those children about technology from the beginning, and then individual teachers take over too. So this is a funding issue. It passed the Senate, but it didn't pass out of the House Appropriations Committee. So again, that can be taken up in the Appropriations Committee and go forward from there this session, and we hope it will do that. I don't know a lot yet because they have the pre-filing session hasn't started yet. So I don't know what bills are going to be pre-filed at this point. But I ask all of you that are here in this breakout session, pay attention to what's going on in education and any bills that affect that, and take whatever action we asked you to take during this session. Okay, I think that's my presentation.
Thanks, Catherine. I think we do have a few minutes if you're willing to take a couple questions.
Sure.
Does anyone have questions for Catherine? Catherine, how long have you lobbied on education issues for the League? Decades?
100 years, I think now. No, I think it's been 26 years.
Yeah, well.
And I'm not finished. I haven't done a good job because everything hasn't been taken care of.
Okay.
You can't do it all.
Karen and then Anne. Karen Vero.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Is there anything on your list about increasing civic education actually happening? I know the law was passed, as you know, that we worked so hard on that bill. Reichtel says, oh, it's fully, I heard that he said, oh, civic education is totally taken care of now. It's robust, but we know it's not. So I'm wondering if there's anything on your list that would relate to civic education in particular.
It's following the law that was passed, that last bill that we worked on, Karen, that says you have to teach about tribal governance. And there is a curriculum that teachers can go online and get. in-time memorial, I
Which
think.
has been being updated, that program, but it
Okay.
also, the basics about how government works is not fully implemented either.
Yeah, well, right. It's a constant local district issue that, you know, some districts are doing really well in this, some are not. And there doesn't seem to be any accountability for those schools that aren't following the law. We
Right.
had a wonderful experience in Kitsap County, in North Kitsap particularly. We had a civics teacher who had her kids discuss what a school board does and what they would like to see a school board do. And they submitted questions for our North Kitsap School Board Forum, candidate forum, that were wonderful questions, but that was only one teacher in one school that was doing this sort of work. So we're going to be pushing for it to happen in all districts.
Great,
This
thank you.
Well, it also sounds, Catherine, like when we're doing candidate forums, for school board members, this is a question we need to be asking too.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So Anne, you're muted.
You're still muted.
Here.
There you go.
Okay.
I have just a comment because I have a rather varied educational background. I work in international schools and I've worked in a variety of different kinds of schools in different places. And currently now I'm just substituting in Tacoma schools. So when I go to these schools, I'm absolutely shocked when I talk to some of the people in the office about the number of homeless kids in the schools. They're high numbers. And they say, actually, what happens is the parents do not register as homeless, or they do not let authorities know their children because they don't want their children taken by foster care. They want to keep their children with them. And so this is actually a very serious sidebar to these issues, because we have children that are doing their homework in cars. I mean, this is ridiculous. They can't do anything, and it really stymies them. And yet the parents are terrified of having their children taken away. Okay, that's thing one. If there was a way to address that, if there was some kind of home structures for people who are homeless, for families that are homeless, that they can go to, where they have a small apartment where they can stay until things improve. I know that gets into housing, but these issues all overlap. The other issue is, at one point when I was at Mount Tahoma School, I was asked to go with the kids to an apprenticeship program. And I was stunned at how fantastic that apprenticeship was. And I'm thinking, if you could have some sort of apprenticeship program for children who are either coming out of foster care or who are in foster care, or all the special needs things for these children who have personal experience to become involved with and learn about, that's a first step for getting a scholarship into a community college and to making a very good, because they're coming with personal experience, and there's nothing more powerful than that. So I would like to see in the apprenticeship program something that's done that has to do with these social aspects of all of these really serious issues. It can even be education in the penal system for these children that can't access it, because you know what they have to do is, they may not be the main person, but any teacher appreciates extra hands. Any teacher appreciates someone that can go work with different students at different times. And what this does is it fills it out, and it makes a lot more things possible. And for those children who succeed and get good recommendations, they have a free pass into community college, more than likely.
So Catherine, do you want to comment, and then maybe Janet?
Well, I can speak for Janet too. We would support all of these things. Have you contacted your legislators to ask them?
Because I'm a person that is I do international substitution. So sometimes I'm gone for a period of 6 months or 10 months or a year or something like that. And then I'm here now. But these are issues, in fact, this whole new development, this whole new project for reorienting and restructuring cities is so exciting that I'm very happy to get involved with it. I'm not quite sure what a step would be in terms of what I think is the apprenticeship program, which I think is a super valuable thing.
Yeah, and I know we have addressed apprenticeship programs and given more support to them in the past. The legislature has.
Yeah.
So what I'll try and do is look back and see who sponsored a bill on apprenticeships and see if there can be some improvements made.
That would be good. And I don't know what you do with the homeless kids.
Yeah,
in
I don't
homeless
know
schools.
either.
That is horrific. I mean, in these schools that are not that big, to have the percentages that they do of homeless kids is
Yeah,
just a shock.
agreed.
Yeah. So Janet, do you happen to know what the rules are around child welfare involvement with homeless families? That might be something we need to educate ourselves about.
Yeah.
Well, they're squishy. And that a lot of it depends on how that family interacts or has that first contact with CPS, who the particular worker is that looks at them and evaluates and how they might evaluate. I think, and I won't say this with absolute certainty, but I believe that homelessness in and of itself is not enough to put a family in CPS. However, if that family who is homeless ends up with contact with CPS, you can find a multitude of reasons if you want to take that child. So so I would say they're squishy.
Thank you, Janet. I appreciate all the questions. Let me talk just for a few minutes about early learning, and then we'll go back to questions. In talking with Catherine and Janet about this session, it really sparked some thinking for me. I spent time as a family child care provider when my children were young. And then I was a child welfare worker for a number of years, and then came back to childcare and early learning. And one of the reasons that I just moved that direction goes to what Janet was saying, what Karen Vera was saying, that if families are at risk, if we can provide supports before they're in trouble, we can prevent a lot of damage for many, many of the families. So things like home visitation with pregnant women and families with an infant who are at risk, high quality childcare, high quality early learning, other early intervention programs. The research shows that those make a difference with vulnerable families, and maybe we can keep families together. Not that it isn't important to intervene if kids are in danger, but that's where my heart is, and that's why I work early learning issues. A long time ago, I heard somebody say about child welfare, instead of putting ambulances at the bottom of the cliff, we need to put fences at the top of the cliff to keep people from falling off. And that image has always stuck with me. That said, we heard from that, probably particularly what happened with COVID and workforce shortages almost devastated the childcare system, not only in this state, but across the country. And what caused it not to totally fail was the COVID money that came in from the federal government. And even with that, we still have some issues, or quite a lot of issues. I think really what COVID did was point up the problems that were always there in our childcare and early learning system. So what happened was in 2021, the legislature passed a comprehensive bill called the Fair Start for Kids Act, which, you know, as a basic premise was the need to expand accessible, affordable childcare and early development program. And it talked about the importance of high quality programs to the development of children coming to school ready. And, you know, the legislature was hearing from businesses they couldn't get workers. And one of the reasons workers couldn't work is they didn't have childcare. So that was also one of the things the legislature found. And then the other issue with childcare and early learning is that the workers in the field are predominantly women of color who get very low wages, limited benefits, no retirement. And so the system in itself exploits the very workers who make it happen. So last year, most of what happened related to implementing the Fair Start for Kids Act. And so things like increasing the reimbursement rates for the state pre-K program, ECAP, and the subsidy program, Working Connections Childcare, and home visiting contractors, largely because they were having trouble getting workers at the wages that the programs could pay. The legislature also provided money to help providers serve kids with complex needs. Again, COVID has really created some real dilemmas in families, and providers are seeing more kids in early learning programs, childcare, who have behavioral issues that are hard to manage. And so providing mental health consultation for providers. One of the other things that was really interesting is funding was provided for tribal early learning grants to tribal childcare and pre-K programs so that they could build in cultural aspects to their curriculum in those programs. I think the money, something like $5 million, what is being provided to tribes for that purpose. And then there was also a provision around making it easier for homeless families to retain childcare assistance. So that was all, those were budget items. There were also several bills that passed. One that, and this is one to, plant in the back of your mind, is that there's a bill that makes it possible for parents and other caregivers to receive unemployment benefits if they lose their job because they don't have caregiving for their child or the senior person they care for. There was also one that prohibits homeowners associations from unduly restricting siting of childcare in units within or homes within the association. And there was also one that makes it easier for enrollees in apprenticeship programs to get childcare assistance. There was strong bipartisan support for that bill. As you've heard from the speakers, the expectations for this session are modest because, that's just what happens in a 60-day session. But the three things that I'm hearing from the advocates that are going to be priorities are increasing investments in infant and early childhood mental health consultation. And this is one aimed at making childcare and pre-K more affordable and accessible to low and moderate income families. It would exclude child support, Social Security, and SSI payments from family income in determining eligibility for those programs. And child support is a particularly tricky one with childcare subsidies, because as I'm sure most of you know, child support can be here 1 month and not the next month. So it really makes it hard for families to maintain their eligibility and stability for their kids in childcare. And then there's also a proposal to increase funding for ECAP, because their ECAP, the state pre-K program, has a legislatively mandated entitlement goal to have all eligible kids have slots by 2016. So the state's kind of on the hook on that one. Looking forward to 2025, when there will be a full budget session, one of the things that is on the horizon is there's been a diverse group of early childhood folks, childcare providers meeting, and they have been talking about the need for us to reimburse childcare providers for the care of low and moderate income families based on what it costs to provide childcare, assuming living wages for providers. And they've come up with a proposal that I think we'll begin hearing about during this session, but they will be making a major push for in the 2025 session. And it's not going to be on the cheap. I mean, we as a state benefit from the problems in the childcare system, and what childcare providers get paid is based on what parents can afford to pay, which is less than their true value. And so watch for that discussion. The other thing I think we're going to be seeing in 2025 is more discussion about the inequities in our tax system and ways to tax wealth and maybe particular capital gains. We get taxed on our property, but the wealthy don't get taxed on the value of their capital gains. And so there's some look at that. So anyway, lots on the horizon. And so at that, I'll open it up for questions for any of us. Anne has had her hand up for a long time.
Well, yeah, I just, when you first started talking about the lack of early childhood education, but it actually expands to actually most education. What you have to consider it as is a basic service in an area, especially with this new, more dense population model. That's true for cities, for Tacoma, for instance, the more dense, that you have to consider as part of basic services, that it needs to be included in the model as a basic service. But the other thing that has to be included is smaller schools, so that children are known by their teachers. Right now, the schools are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And with the new high density model, that might have to be looked at in terms of smaller schools. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you,
That's
Anne.
great.
Catherine, did you want to comment on smaller schools?
Well, I think the reason that schools are getting bigger are that local districts are consolidating, say, 2 schools into one because their enrollment is down, which means their state funding is down. There's a couple of reasons for this. I think some parents during COVID said, well, I'm having to be at home helping to educate my children, so why don't I just go to homeschooling? Another reason that might be there is that the fear of parents sending their kids to school afraid that they might get shot. We can't eliminate
Yeah,
that
yeah, good.
that reason. And the other reason is I just read recently about the huge increase in overall online learning. But part of that is that fewer of those kids that are learning online on our online schools in this state are meeting standards along the way
Yeah.
and therefore graduating. So I'm wondering sometimes if our school districts pushing those difficult students into enrolling in an online school. Is the education just not as good? It's something the legislature needs to address in the future. I don't expect it to happen this session, but it needs to be looked at.
You know, Catherine, this morning I read an article online about a child who was part of a family that was doing homeschool, where they speculated that the homeschooling was to cover the abuse that was going on. And it seems to me that, and the article concluded that we need to have more, I don't know, involvement with homeschooling families, just to make sure that's not happening. We got a question from Patrice online about any consideration for the childcare needs of families who don't work 9 to 5. And yes, Patrice, I mean, that is a huge issue with the state of our labor market now. And one of the proposals, and I think this is in a decision package from the agency, would be to do a $500 bonus for providers who are serving kids outside the normal hours. So it helps cover their staffing costs and the cost of operating more hours. Do you have thoughts about what the state might be doing?
No, that's why I asked the question.
Okay.
And I think this especially affects healthcare, and yeah, and you know there are tons of people that don't work normal hours, or so many couples may split up the childcare responsibilities. Maybe one works days and one works nights, and yeah.
Well, at least there's some recognition for low and moderate income families and an attempt to get additional funding to providers to create an incentive to provide those non-standard hour cares.
Right. Well, is that $500 per student or $500
per? Oh, $500 for per child per month.
per month? Okay.
Yeah.
Susan's had her hand up.
Yeah. What was that?
Susan Fleming's had her hand up for quite a while.
Right. Susan's next.
I have another issue, but I just wanted to add to that last discussion. Care for a child who has a cold or is sick. When I had a child, that was a terrible problem. when my son got measles, my husband and I had to split our days. I just think there needs to be something, not a kid that's really sick, but a kid who just is sick enough not to go to school. But anyway, I see running through a lot of these problems, poverty being the issue. It really has become a crime to be poor. And that happens in a lot of neglect and abuse cases. It has to do with so many things. The fact that people do not have enough money to live. And I know we care about that a lot in our state, but I wonder if we need to focus on something like a guaranteed minimum income. And I'd just like to know what you think about how many of our problems with children might be resolved if people had more money to live on, enough to basically live.
Well, you know, the thing that occurs, a couple things occur to me. One is there is research from the federal child care tax credit that was implemented with COVID, and it showed that child poverty rates were dramatically reduced and that families were better off. And you know, and it's gone away. I think it's something we could look at as a state. The other thing is that there is a proposal, and I think actually, I don't know if Senator Frame talked about this, that maybe if we could get a wealth tax on financial assets, we could target that funding to a guaranteed income for families. And there is research that shows that makes a difference. So you're right. Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Well, I'm with Susan. I think a lot of those issues could be taken care of if families had enough money and other resources that were for them. And yeah, it has become a crime. We actually criminalize it now, but in some ways it's always been a sin in that there's a moral ness attached to being poor, kind of from the old Calvinist sort of thing. If you're living that way, it's God's punishment or whatever. And although it's not framed in those kinds of things anymore, I think we need to also kind of confront that that's in there head on, because otherwise there's just so much reluctance to give money to people directly. Or if they do, they want to put so many strings on it. They have to spend it this way, or they have to do that with it, or we can only do it if we control it, because they can't. And I think that attitude also needs to be looked at. And that's not anything one legislates, but it should be at least front and center instead of just a given that permeates.
Yeah. You know, it reminds me of a conversation I had with a teacher years ago who had a young boy coming to class. I think it was at junior high at the time. And he was dirty and his clothes were dirty. And she personally made sure that he was able to go into a restroom and wash up. And she personally bought clean clothes for him to put on, because he was bullied, made fun of in class and in school all the time for basically being too poor to afford a shower and clean clothes. And so you're right, Janet, it's so pervasive. Oh, well, the welfare mother, and oh, she's getting state funds, and no, I'm too proud, I'll never take state funds. I mean, those are attitudes that I don't know how we change those, but we need to think about it. And one more thing I want to say before we leave too, it was brought out that they want to do some sort of more drug education in the schools. And I think that's so needed. I mean, the fentanyl, these kids are taking pills that their friends gave them, and they have no clue as to what's in them. We need to educate those kids, starting at a very young age, about what could be in that pill that your friend is giving you. So another issue, along with many, many more.
To me, if I not out of line,
Oh, just go ahead. We're small enough that we can just
the whole concept of we can help these kids today get through school, get a little better education, have a little bit more grounding, then when they're raising kids, their kids will be a little bit more grounded too. So it's, it's anything we can do to help parents work with their kids and learn how to manage money, whatever the issue is that they're struggling with, so that they can make the next step and be proud of themselves about how well they took care of their kids, instead of feeling embarrassed because they took my kids away. It's it's a big package.
It is.
Yeah, I agree with Karen on that. But just to add to that, one thing we do is we try to make programs to help people without including the people we want to help. So I think something like that, we should be including a group of people who have experienced the problems, so that we're sure we're doing something that would help them that they think would help.
Yeah, and that goes back to Janet's concern about the kids who don't have a voice, who large group of foster kids aren't brought to the legislature to talk about their experiences. No, it's the adults who we are all knowing, so we can make whatever laws we want for those kids. And it's the same thing, whether it's poverty or lack of health care. We need to get the people that are most affected in there to talk to the legislature. And boy, that's hard to do too, but we need to keep at it.
But it's easier now that they can do it online.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's only if they have access to the internet. I found it very ironical when the federal government said, "Oh, we've got a lot of money to help you if you don't have internet. Please send us an email." Oh, how would I do that if I don't have the internet?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that how much of our state does not have access to broadband. It's just huge. And we could say with our books as an example, oh, it's online, they can go online. No, they can't. Maybe they don't even have a computer because they don't think about broadband. So, it's
right. And we're making some progress slowly to do that. But what I find in my county is the added internet connections are mainly in higher income neighborhoods that don't have it, and they are each required to pay a certain amount of the total cost. Well, that's not helping those that are living in poverty and don't have access.
I was impressed by our local community college, because they are providing housing for homeless students. And one room, and they said, I have a room and a key, and they're so excited because they have a key. And and that's, the college is doing that for many students, and I'm sure other community colleges are too. But I thought, what a huge step. And a couple of them have little kids, but they still have this one room with a bathroom and a key, and they feel safe. Which is a huge gift.
It's great.
That we hope other people would have that kind of support. So
yeah.
So any final words? We're a little bit early, so we're not in a hurry, but at 11, we have a lunch break from 11:40 to 12:15. If we stop now, you might have just a few more minutes for lunch.
Well, I'd like for you all to say what you think is most important to have happen this session. Is it housing? Are there some of these bills that you've brought up? What would you really most like to see progress on?
Well, not surprising, Susan. I still think we have to do a lot more with education, and that covers a whole bunch of areas too. It covers housing for the homeless. It covers, behavioral health. So I don't know.
Janet, what would you like to see happen?
Well, I'd like to see that instead of dealing with the symptoms of the care industry, we dealt with the actual problems, which you, Karen, had kind of talked about. However, in terms of practical, what's going to happen in my area with this, I think I would like to see some real progress around the sexual exploitation of children. And that would be both passing that the clergy needed to be mandated reporters, including, confession and everything else, and that there's some real efforts to be made to find a workable solution with the safe haven laws, so that children who have been trafficked will get the care that they really need. And that's going to be a big one. And like Karen said about some of her things, that won't be on the cheap. And it will go across several different things, and that there will need to be housing, there will need to be behavioral care, health care, probably health care as well. So that would be a tough one, and I hope they make real progress on that.
So from the early care and education standpoint, again, I don't think there's going to be anything very sexy this year. But I do think there may be some incremental steps toward implementing the Fair Start for Kids Act. And I'm going to be really curious to see where this effort on the part of childcare workers goes towards changing how we pay for care for kids that are subsidized through the state. I think that's going to be really interesting. Anyway, do you have a big box in the middle of your screen?
Yes.
Thank you all. This has been a great discussion.
Thank you.
And do watch the legislative newsletter. We do updates every week, so you can follow what we're seeing and weigh in and help. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.